admitted to it yet. But this is a biggie, you guys. It's what lawyers call piercing the corporate armor. So, you know, these corporations have litigation protection, they have liability protection. Well, now in Michigan, it's been pierced by this one case. And if that's the case, it might trickle through so that other big pharma companies are held liable. So let's talk about it. Last week, we had talked about whether or not big pharma could be held liable if there was a way to pierce the PrEP Act. The PrEP Act is the immunity that big pharma got from the government for all claims related to COVID products due to the emergency nature of the pandemic. Well, we talked about whether or not the PrEP Act could be pierced if there was some evidence of fraud or something of that ilk, because maybe that's how that armor gets pierced. Well, look at this case. This is Dan Nowacki, Michigan resident. He had 2 strokes and he had his leg amputated after receiving remdesivir. Sorry, I practiced that today and it just didn't come out. That's a COVID treatment. It's not a COVID vaccine. Now, he had it in November of 2021. He had a series of doses. And then after, a few weeks later, remdesivir was recalled due to contamination with glass particles in your COVID medicine.
How does that happen? How do you get ground up glass particles in your batch? And apparently it happened to a lot of people. It wasn't just him.
Enough that they recalled it.
I mean,
I don't know.
It's like Homer Simpson that works there and he just walks by and he's hitting beakers that fall and smash. How does that happen in this environment?
More scientific
I know, I'm sure there is. I'm just curious how the hell that happens.
So here is a piece of that evidence. This is his son writing to the hospital where he was treated. It's hard to read, but what he's saying is, did my father, have any of these batches? And the hospital writes him back. This is a letter from the hospital to him saying, yes, indeed, our records indicate that your father did receive 2 doses of this batch. That was then recalled later. It said we gave it to him on November 10th and 11th, and then 13th and 14th, and the recall didn't happen until December 3rd. So he was getting this, that the drug company then later found out, whoops, this is dangerous, let's recall it. But this poor guy got 5 whole doses, had 2 strokes, and then legs amputated. So will this piercing of the armor, this is the question, affect other pharmaceuticals who made COVID vaccines, who we know now there is a non-zero chance of adverse events, serious ones, from the COVID vaccine? Will they now be held liable? According to health blogger Steve Kirsch, this could mean that Pfizer is held liable for the SV40 contamination. So let's talk about this, because last week it was confirmed that the Pfizer COVID vaccine had the SV40 sequence. Here is what Health Canada wrote to the Epic Times confirming this. They said Health Canada expects sponsors to identify biologically functional DNA sequence within the plasmid, such as an SV40 enhancer, at the time of submission. Although the full DNA sequence of the Pfizer plasmid was provided at the time of initial filing, the sponsor did not specifically identify the SV40 sequence. So Health Canada is saying, yes, there's SV40 in it, but we didn't know it when Pfizer submitted their documents. Now, the FDA and the CDC has not said whether or not Pfizer told them about this SV40. So they're in a catch-22. Do they say they knew about it and went forward and then didn't tell us, so we didn't have informed consent, the consumers or the patients? Or do they say they didn't know about it, and if they didn't know about it, that's possibly fraud, right? There's something that Pfizer may have a pierce in that armor. Now, doctors say that SV40 is a carcinogen or cause cancer. Others say, well, no, SV40 is actually not necessarily a cancer-causing agent. Well, the thing is that we don't know because we're not allowed to study it. So you can say SV40 causes cancer. You can say it doesn't. There is an argument for the fact that it doesn't because it's not the SV40 antigen. It's a delivery device. We're going to talk about the distinction in a second. But here is some proof that you're just not supposed to know about SV40, and you're not supposed to continue studying it if you're a researcher. This is from the book Turtles All the Way Down. Now, what they're saying is what some medical researchers say. I know that's not a good screen. I'm going to read it to you, and don't worry about how that looks crappy on your phone. I apologize. What they're saying is that SV40 is related to the polio vaccine. And that's interesting because in 1960, this researcher, Bernice Eddy, a researcher at the NIH, discovered that injecting hamsters with a small amount of the substrate used in the Salk polio vaccine led to the development of cancerous tumors in the hamsters. She was told she could not publish this discovery. Her managers were concerned that the publication could severely harm the vaccination program, but she presented her findings anyway at a scientific cancer conference in New York. Her manager's response was swift. Her lab was taken away from her. She was demoted and moved to another position. Soon thereafter, her findings were corroborated by other researchers, and the carcinogen in the substrate was identified by 2 Merck researchers. What did they find? A previously unidentified virus found in the rhesus monkey kidneys, which had been used to grow the polio virus for the vaccine. The new virus was named SV40. Further tests confirmed its presence in a significant portion in both the Salk and Sabin vaccines, so they're the 2 popular polio vaccines produced in the United States. So when this researcher found a connection, she did not find a connection between the SV40 antigen. She just found a connection between that vaccine, which contained SV40, and cancer and tumors, right? So do we know? So when people say we don't know that SV40 causes cancers, it's because they're not allowed to study it. They literally don't know. In fact, some say, well, what's in these vaccines is just the SV40 promoter and not the antigen, meaning the thing that causes the virus, and that this has been used in other vaccines for decades. Again, look what happened to the one woman who wanted to study it. She was deplatformed, basically canceled, right? So they just don't know. So when they say, no, this is not a carcinogen and it's fine, they don't know. They don't know which element of SV40 was carcinogenic. They only found evidence of it in hamsters, and they told her not to publish it. So this could mean that the Pfizer vaccine may have had contamination, just like remdesivir, if anyone were willing to look into it, which they're not, right? But given that the FDA and the CDC have not said a damn word about SV40 since this revelation last week from Health Canada, it's an important question. Did the FDA know about this? If so, when? Or did Pfizer not tell them? Did they falsify documents? That's the question.
And we may be getting some answers on this because a number of high-profile doctors and members of Congress are now, where you've seen a lot of COVID stories floating around over the past few weeks, right?
Yeah.
We saw this with nursing moms or with other stories. It didn't really seem to strike the alarm bells like this story.
Yeah.
But over the past 24 hours, I've seen a number of high-profile doctors, Dr. Asim Mayorta and others, who are raising the alarm bells of this. We may get an investigation that goes through Congress, may have people called before
I don't think
Parliament.
we're going to get that. There's no appetite for that in
the
government.
European Union.
Maybe.
This is a big deal. This is not a small This is not a small problem.
No. What I think that the only way we're going to get this is through litigation. And it's got to be, if you think about the idea of piercing the corporate armor, there's got to be a bunch of little swords thrown at it to pierce the armor. For every 10 lawsuits, probably one of them will put a chink in that armor. Is that a chink in the armor?
Yeah, not a shink.
Whatever.
A chink, yeah. A chink in the armor.
And so it's only through litigation that we're going to get these answers. And Pfizer will be dragged into this, and the FDA will too. Here's how. Go ahead.
I was just going to say one benefit to one of them piercing the armor will be that will set a precedent. And once the precedent is set, then it will be easier for more to avoid.
Right. Yeah. So, I hate the idea that Americans were too litigious, but this is how we litigate our values. And if we're saying we were wronged by the government and these companies during the pandemic, it has to be solved in the courts. That's no other way because duels are not allowed right now. Did you know that journalists used to carry guns because they were regularly challenged to duels? That's just not the way we live right now. So it has to be litigation, unfortunately. Here's how health blogger Steve Kirsch put it. He says, now the FDA is at a crossroads. Either they admit they knew about the plasma contamination and failed to disclose that to the public or outside committees, or they can claim they didn't know about it, in which case Pfizer is liable. And we have the Pfizer documents that were given to the FDA, so we know what the FDA got. And I seriously doubt there's any disclosure of SV40 contamination. We haven't seen it, but is it somewhere else that we haven't seen? Means we have an adulterated vaccine and the FDA has to remove it from the market until that is fixed. And if the FDA doesn't do that, this is what he's saying, should face criminal prosecution for endangering the public and not following the law. So again, and he further says that he's speaking to, personal harm attorneys, other people, business attorneys who would be looking into this. He says he got up the phone with this one attorney and confirmed that here's a list of 90 lawyers you can contact if you want to sue the vaccine manufacturers. So they are ramping up. Will any of them succeed in piercing that corporate veil? Clayton, so I guess now we have a little friendly bet. He thinks Congress is going to do something about it. I find that laughable. I think it has to be solved in the courts.
I think you're right. I think we will see that. And I think that if the amount of lawsuits you're about to see unfold is going to be unprecedented, I think. And as Steve Kirsch just further, he's just tweeting a moment ago, he said, legal opinions will vary, of course, but I just got off the phone with a very high profile attorney who asked not to be named and said that the key question is, do you have to tie your harm to the adulteration specifically of this vaccine? And he said, or does the adulteration remove the liability protection on the base product? He said, as expected, the case is stronger if you can link the adulteration causing the injuries, but there is still liability if you didn't give informed consent to having an adulterated product injected into your body. So the answer is it's not necessary, which is stunning. So amount of lawsuits that we could see going after Pfizer and these scumbags who pulled all of this garbage on people and lied to people, and then going after the FDA.
Yeah.
What did the CDC know? And who at the CDC signed off on these things? Who at the FDA signed off on these things? What about Dr. Fauci? At what point, how high does this go in this chain? And that's where I think Congress can get involved in full-on major congressional hearings on this.
And how far back? So I've just shown you this one case from 1960 where a researcher tried to study SV40, tried to study the cancer-causing agents in the polio vaccine, and was told to shut it down. So what other studies have been shut down? So I watched some of the conversation on Twitter from people who are saying, oh, stop it, SV40 does not cause cancer. How can they say that? I can't say it does. I can say that this lady found a correlation, but I can't say it does, and I can't say it doesn't. And there is an entire, not conspiracy, there's a concerted effort to stop down on vaccine research such as this. So we've shown it to you. Let us know what you think.
Now let's talk about
story.
Okay, that's great. An amazing job. And I'm fascinated by this. We've invited Steve Kirsch to join us here on the show. He's been a guest on the show before, so hopefully Steve can come on to talk more about this. He's out there fighting the good fight on the litigation side of this and trying to get people answers. My question is, does it make sense for there to be like some big class action lawsuit? I saw someone here in the chat just saying, come on guys, class action lawsuit. And we know that lawyers make a lot of money on class action lawsuits. Does it do enough, though, to go after these companies? Or is it better to have 200, 300, 400 different civil cases? Because they're all going to be different. That's the thing, right? Because the damages might be different. Like, people can bring class
not in this case. I think a class action lawsuit absolutely makes sense because...
But then they could argue, of course, and we could ask a lawyer on this, like different batches, maybe different things, right?
Not if there is proof that all of them had SV40 and none of them had consent, then no. In fact, the history of a class action lawsuit came from mass producing products.
Right.
Whereas at once, you and I, you used my horse, you broke your leg, you sued me or whatever, right? We knew each other. Mass producing products means you don't know the person that sold you your cigarette or what have you. you're buying it in bulk. And so if you are all harmed similarly, you have a case. So I would encourage you, if you're interested in this, to go and look out for these Steve Kirsch tweets and find the list of lawyers and maybe talk to them if you're interested in this.
How many of you know somebody or were personally affected by this? Like, how? I'm just curious. Maybe we can put up a poll here, David. Can you put up a poll on our? Because I don't think has Rumble added a poll yet. Rumble, come on, add the poll. But on YouTube, I'm really curious, and we can even follow it up in the newsletter tomorrow.
Okay, but here's how we have to frame it because of the industrial censorship complex. Is just like, do you know anyone who had adverse events from?
Why don't we just ask it very, very generically so YouTube doesn't literally kick our channel off the air?
Yeah, have you know, or have you or anyone you know been affected by what we're talking about?
Yes, yes, that's good. Yes. Do you? Yeah. Have you or anyone you know been affected by what we are talking about? That's how.
It's code. We're talking in code with you.
Yeah.
20,000 people.
So, we got 15,000 of you watching on Rumble right now. So
you can come over and vote on the YouTube stream, and then you can come back
if you want to, and then hop back over to Rumble, a free speech platform. There you go. Have you or anyone you know been affected by what we are talking about? That's right. Just let us know in the comments.
And I wanted to add too, like to Clayton's point about Congress, I think if the FDA ends up being implicated, Congress will have no choice but to respond in some way to either put some kind of thing in place to control the FDA and what they can actually do in the CDC. So I think at some point they will have to get involved.
Yeah, you'd like to think so. Depends on who's running the show. They don't even have a Speaker of the House right now.
They suck. So we have no.
But also, like, how often does it happen though in class action lawsuits where the offending party just settles, and then part of that settling is they admit no fault.
Yeah.
And so then, like, you have to have the lawyers that are not after the monetary compensation. They have to be motivated by like the punishment aspect of it. Otherwise, you don't put that chain in the armor. You can't pierce it then.
So the question is, too, I see some people raising the question about emergency use authorization. If it's an emergency vaccine, where does that fall? Does that give them sort of blanket protection here in some other way? And apparently, no, it doesn't. It doesn't. So anyway, fascinating. Very excited to see where this goes. Took an army of people to try to figure this one out, but hopefully we'll get answers so these people don't just like run roughshod
really quick.
over us.
1,100 votes already, 71% yes.
Yes.
Jeez. Keep the votes coming in, guys. All right, we've got more news to get to. We're going to talk about medical assistance in dying, the MAID Act in Canada, which is expanding. Canada has the largest number of medical assisted suicides in the world. The United States is catching up to them. Netherlands is not.